Today, the German people find themselves once more in charge of Europe. The ingenuity and the hard-working spirit of the German people has raised Germany from the ashes, clearing off the bricks, ready to rebuild after World War II when their major cities were totally leveled by heavy bombing. And through their ingenuity and hard work, Germany now holds all of the cards in Europe. Huge surpluses of money, and half of all of that they produce is exported around the world like no other economy on earth. The German Chancellor also rules over the new European government, and nothing is done in the European Parliament without the approval of the German Chancellor. These negotiations with the British are basically controlled by the German Chancellor. When Mr. Cameron, the British Prime Minister, went to renegotiate before Brexit, he had to go see the German Chancellor, not the European leaders. He went straight to Germany. And there is prophecy talks about the British in these days acting like a silly dove, that the people who represent Britain would run to Germany and beg for help. After the formation of the economic union, then the formation of a united Europe and the domination of Europe by Germany and the Catholic Church will not apply to Britain. Jean-Claude Juncker, a descendant of the family who built the Junkert bomber, has ordered a European army by 2025, and Germany has said that they will pay for nuclear weapons. And so we can see a repeat of history forming on the European continent. And Mr. Cameron actually said, as he was leaving 10 Downing Street, to those who won the Brexit decision, that you will start a war. And sometimes God has the leader of the nation actually state a prophecy, because now we see the units of many of the European nations being absorbed into the German army. This is not just a coming together of various forces. This new European army is headed by the German army. And so there's a warning given to the German people. You may wonder why you have been involved in 2 world wars with the British and the Americans down through history, and there's a feeling of guilt in young Germans about this. But I can explain that to you. And way back in history, the German people, Deutsch, the ancestors of the Germans, the ancient Assyrians, the Heshi, the Hessians came from Germany to America to help the British fight in the Revolutionary War. You can find their roots back in ancient Assyria, and the Alemannia, the Spanish call you, their roots are back in ancient Assyria. We all came from somewhere before we finished up in Central Europe. If you read in the second book of Kings, you find Assyria constantly punishing Israel, Britain's ancestors, for breaking God's law. And if you read in the book of Isaiah, chapter 10, verses 5 and 6, God tells your ancestors there, I'm appointing you as my disciplinarians, as he calls you the rod of his anger. But he also warns you against excessive brutality. The descendants of Israel are the Western nations, and the British people and the Americans and the Australians and the New Zealanders, who all were dragged into those 2 world wars and received a lot of punishment before they were allowed to have victory in those 2 wars. And another punishment is about to come through Germany and through the European Union. 10 nations only. So there's more nations to leave Europe, and there are many nations in Europe will go into captivity, literally captivity. The northwestern nations and the French and the Dutch and others will be locked into this Europe under captivity, just as they went into captivity in World War II. Like the British and American people, the German people have also lost track of their roots, where they came from, where they originated, in the ancient Assyrian nation that traveled west with the descendants of ancient Israel who had been taken into captivity and were placed between the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus Mountains. The German people migrated then into Central Europe. They got the German name from the Romans, who called them men of war, which is what German means. They called themselves the Deutsch. Their ancient origin came from the father of their nation, Asher, and they changed that to Deutsch in a worship of their ancestor. This is why you're known as the Deutschlanders today. If you go to page 6 at the American Britain's Future, you'll see a history there written by a German historian in volume 2 of the Compendium of True World History in chapters 1 and chapter 2. Roots of Assyria and going back even farther, and the kings of the German people, the early Assyrians. And if you go to page 1, you'll find a most interesting short story there on Germany. And that takes you into the future after God has to arrive here to settle World War III with the destruction of every military that is assembled to destroy all living things on this earth with the tremendous ability that we have built up now for our own self-destruction. And then we are told that in the future, the three major world powers down through history will become God's favorite people, and the German people, the Deutschlanders, will be one of those three. But before that day comes, you will be used to destroy America and Britain's cities. And after so doing, German cities will be destroyed by nuclear attack from Russia and China, because we have broken God's laws to the point where we have to be corrected before we can be used in future generations to set the very best example to the nations of this world on into the future, which lasts forever.